And if you, those that are sticking around with me, if you want to flip ahead in your Bible to 1 Samuel chapter 4, we have made it to chapter 4. And no, this is not chapter 5, which is my favorite story, Rebecca. It's my favorite story, but chapter 5 is definitely my favorite. But this is definitely the lead up to it. And I definitely, as awful as what we're about to read is, it is such a powerful reminder, right? First off, of hubris and how dangerous that is. And also, we once again, we're going to see the fall of pride happen right here. So it says this, and Samuel's word came all to Israel, and now the Israelites went out to fight against the Philistines. Now this is important because traditionally, as we went through the book of Judges, you'll remember, it was the Philistines that just kept coming and oppressing the Israelites, right? Because they had grown weak in power and they were just coming and they would plunder them all the time. But this time, it seems that Israel is at least renewed in confidence or a perceived strength of themselves. They suddenly think higher of themselves and they think, you know what? It's time to give back. We're gonna go out there and we're gonna show them Philistines a thing or two. So this age-old enemy who one day appeared on their coast after failing to defeat Egypt is now looking at an army march towards it. It says the Israelites camped at Ebenezer and the Philistines at Aphek, so just opposing cities. And so the Philistines deployed their forces to meet Israel, right? Because Israel's the one marching over to war. And as the battle spread, Israel was defeated by the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 of them on the battlefield. So this isn't just a loss, this is a bad loss. And I remember when I would read in the Bible, like when I was younger, and I hear 4,000, and I think of kind of what the world is now, where we have like 8 billion people. And I think 4,000 doesn't sound like that big because battles today, right? Like 4,000 people, you sink a ship, you're going to kill like 4,000 people. It's crazy. But back then, right, we're talking about like literally these battles were fought around tens of thousands of people. So this is a massive slaughter. This did not go well. This was a really, really bad fight that Israel had picked. And it says, when the soldiers returned to camp, the elders of Israel asked, well, why did the Lord bring defeat on us today before the Philistines? Let us bring the ark of the Lord's covenant from Shiloh so that he may go with us and save us from the hand of our enemies. Now you'll notice something different here. Now let's reflect real quick just back on the time of Judges, when Israel would actually decide to go out and fight and do something. In fact, they didn't just go out and fight and do something. If they wanted the Lord's favor, they would say, God, is this what we should do? Right? They didn't do that here. They just said, this is what we feel is right, and we're going to go do it. And then they said, well, wait a minute. If God is supposed to be with us, because remember, they're taking for granted that promise that was given to Abraham all them years ago, that they would not be abandoned, the covenant promise and the Mosaic promise that has come since then. They're not willing to. They're saying, oh, we're special, so God's going to lead us to victory. And yet God doesn't. And so they say, well, wait, why didn't this happen? Aha, I know what we need to do. We need to bring God into the camp. But here's the problem, right? God doesn't, and we talked about this before, right? An ark is a box, but God isn't trapped in the box. God is enthroned on that throne. Right? They're trying to manipulate God. They think that by bringing God forward, they're going to somehow bolster God's pride. And God's going to say, well, since I'm here, I can't let them defeat me, because if they defeat me, then it'll make me look bad. Right? They think somehow, aha, we got you, God. The Pharisees, when it came to Jesus, really should have learned from this. Stop trying to put God in a box. He always finds his way out of your trap. So it says the people sent men to Shiloh, and they brought back the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord Almighty, who is enthroned between the cherubim, right? This is God's throne. But they still haven't gone to God and asked him. They still haven't asked God for a blessing. They haven't asked God if this is the right thing to do. They're just taking it upon themselves, and they're treating God, as I've heard many other commentators and other pastors say about this particular passage, they're treating God like a lucky rabbit's foot, instead of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Right? They think that by having this relic, this artifact with them, by having the Ark of the Covenant, that somehow their tides will turn. So Eli's two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the Ark of the Covenant of God. And when the Ark of the Lord's Covenant came into the camp, all of Israel was raised with such a shout, and the ground shook. And hearing the uproar, the Philistines asked, "What is all this shouting at the Hebrew camp?" Right? They got excited. They got riled up. Our God is here, and our God is mighty. Remember what he did to the Egyptians? Yeah. What are these Philistines? Like, if our God could defeat Egypt, and these poor Philistines couldn't even muster up the strength to fight them, then what hope do they have against our God? So they heard, hearing an uproar, the Philistines asked, what is all the shouting in the Hebrew camp? And when they learned that the Ark of the Lord had come into the camp, the Philistines were afraid. A God has come into the camp. They said, "Oh no, nothing like this has happened before. We are doomed. Who will deliver us from the hand of these mighty gods?" Remember, so you'll see that mighty gods, because remember, these are polytheists. So as far as they're concerned, they don't really realize that the Hebrews are monotheists. They don't realize that they only believe in the one true God. And so they're just thinking, wait a minute, how can we come against these mighty people if they have their God in their camp? Like, in an extremely superstitious time, this is, of course, something that's understandable why this would cause trembling. It says, "These are the gods who struck down the Egyptians with all kinds of plagues in the wilderness." And remember what I said before, and the Philistines originally, they came from somewhere west. There's argument as to where exactly it was. Most people believe it was the island of Crete, but either way, they're somehow European. They came across, they thought, aha, look at this beautiful land of Egypt. We're going to take it. And then they went to fight Pharaoh, and Pharaoh just sent them right back into the sea. Nuh-uh, not going to happen. And so then they went and they found the Hebrews, who were completely disorganized at this point because it was the time of the judges. And they went, this will be easy. And it was. And they took over the entire Gaza Strip. However, they would have known the story about the God, right, who struck the Egyptians with all the plagues in the wilderness, right? They would have known about what the Hebrews had been led through and what had happened. So they say, "Be strong, Philistines, be men, or you will be subject to the Hebrews as they have been to you. Be men and fight." They are men of faith. And I wrote a quick note in here because I got thinking about it this morning. I want to share a quick story with you. When I was about 16 years old. Are there any Stephen King fans? Did anyone ever read his books? Yeah? You ever heard of Cujo? Yeah. Anyone here know who Cujo is? So what? He's a dog, that's right. He's a very scary dog. I've never seen the movie, never read the book. My mom just told me about it. I'll never forget this for the rest of my life. And then, so I was like, how foolish this story, blah, blah, blah. The next morning, I open up the door to let my dog out, and there on the deck of the porch is this massive, I don't know, it was like a Malamute mixed with a German Shepherd. I open the door and immediately, wham, just slam it shut. The fear took over me because I'm thinking this dog is Cujo and he's here to kill me. I say that to say this, when there's a lot of times where we say that we believe things, we say that we believe in certain things, right? We see the Israelites in this particular story, they seem to have this idea in their hearts that, yeah, if we just do this thing, if we can manipulate God, then God will be with us. Isn't this a good thing? And they get themselves all riled up. And then we see the Philistines, on the other hand, that this idea of true belief, right? Like real faith. They realize, wait a minute, if we don't succeed here, if we don't overcome their God, then what's going to happen to us? We're going to become slaves to them. All these terrible things are going to happen. So you know what? We need to rise up for our gods. We need to go out against them. I say that to say that even though it says that they're looking on in fear, that they're trembling, they're afraid of the stories that they've seen, it's amazing what faith can drive you to do if it's real. I say that because a lot of people will say that we have this belief in God, we believe in Jesus, we believe these things, and yet, and many of you have maybe even had instances in your own lives, or you know people, and you'll watch them do something, you go, wait, doesn't Jesus tell you not to do that? And you're like, yeah, but it's okay in this instance. But if we really had God in that real position in our lives, where we really understood his power, his authority, his lordship, then we would be as afraid of him and violating his rules and violating what he's asked us to do as I was that morning when I woke up and I saw that dog. By the way, it turned out dog wasn't Cujo, it was just the neighbor's dog got off the leash. But still, terrified me. But it was faith that drove these men on. It was faith that allowed them, right? They trusted in their God, and we're going to see it doesn't end well for the Israelites. The Philistines fought, and the Israelites were defeated, and every man fled to his tent, and the slaughter was great. They lost 4,000 in the first fight, and it says Israel lost 30,000 foot soldiers. And the Ark of God was captured, and Eli's two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, died. The sons of the high priest, the future of the priesthood, killed. Right? This would have been a devastating blow to morale. You imagine? And what a bolster of morale to the Philistines. We just overcame their God. We conquered them. And now you're going to see, as we get on into the next chapter, there's going to be what would often happen, right? In any time of triumph, when you have overcome a great thing and you take that trophy and you say, look what we have done, just as they did to Samson, where they would parade him out and say, look at this great champion who caused us such grief, and look at him now, we have brought him low. But what we should understand, being that we've been reading this story and we've been going along, is that God wasn't brought low. God's promise was just fulfilled. Hophni and Phinehas died on the same day. And it says that same day a Benjamite ran from the battle line and went to Shiloh with his clothes torn and his dust on his head. And of course, this is a traditional sign of mourning, right? You would tear your clothes and put the ashes on your head so that people would know this is someone who's in mourning. We don't tend to use these big outward expressions anymore, but they certainly were valid, and they certainly made it obvious to people around us what was going on in their lives. It said, when he arrived, there was Eli sitting on his chair by the side of the road, watching because his heart feared for the ark of God. Now, I have a question about this, because I still don't necessarily understand, and I haven't read a satisfactory commentary, and I feel like until I'm able to sit down and ask God himself, I'm never going to get a satisfactory answer. Was he sitting down because he feared for losing the relic, or was he sitting down and he feared God? Like, which was it in this instance? Right? It says he feared for the ark of God. Why? Because of the box, or because God was taken out there when he shouldn't have been, and Eli knew he shouldn't have been? I don't know. But it's a question that I had to put in my own heart. It's a question I had to ask myself, right? When things happen, when things occur, what is it that I'm more concerned about? Am I more concerned about the material things around me, or am I concerned about my relationship with God and how that's going to be affected? And hopefully, I don't find myself too attached to things like Eli in this situation, whom I think is attached to the actual physical ark, not to God himself. It says, when the man entered the town and told him what had happened, the whole town set up in a cry. And Eli heard the outcry and asked, what is the meaning of this uproar? And the man hurried over to Eli, who was 98 years old. He was very old. His eyes had failed, just as God promised he wouldn't, so that he couldn't see. And then he told Eli, I have just come from the battle line. I fled from it this very day. Eli asked, what happened, my son? The man who brought the news replied, Israel fled before the Philistines. The army has suffered heavy losses. Also, your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God has been captured. And when he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell backward off of his chair by the side of the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died, for he was an old man, and he was heavy. Fat. Why? He had been stealing, remember? He had been stealing what belonged to God, and he had it for himself. He had led Israel for 40 years. Just all of this, just as God had promised. It's good, isn't it? His daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, was pregnant near the time of delivery. And this again, this important detail, it seems so out of whack and strange and out of place, but this is important because once again, it's going to show you God keeps his promises. His daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, was pregnant near the time of delivery, and when she heard the news that the ark of God had been captured and her father-in-law and her husband were dead, right? The whole line of Eli is now gone. She went into labor, gave birth, but was overcome by her labor pains, and as she was dying, right? So she's being killed as well. Why? For her sin, for her part in what she did as well. But as she was dying, she gave birth. And the woman attending her said, "Don't despair, you have given birth to a son." Eli's line continues. But she did not respond or pay any attention. She named the boy Ichabod, saying, "The glory has departed from Israel, because the capture of the ark of God and the deaths of her father-in-law and her husband." She said, "The glory has departed from Israel, and the ark of God has been captured." This is a very sad portion of Scripture, reading about a woman giving birth and dying, about a family being completely eradicated. But God kept his promise. The son was born. That line would continue. When he made that promise to Aaron all them years ago, he kept it, just as he told Eli. But one of the things that I really thought about as we were going through this is our actions have consequences for more than just ourselves. A lot of times we only consider about what happens to us, if we even consider that at all. Rebecca and I have talked a lot about this before, like when we were growing up and when we were kids and stuff like that, and I never got in trouble. I was the kid that didn't get in trouble. And the reason I didn't get in trouble was this. I thought ahead to the trouble I would be in if I did the thing that would get me in trouble. And I went, not worth it. So I just wouldn't do it. Whereas someone like my brother, for example, who would just be like, he'd be, like a normal kid caught up in the moment, be like, yeah, that sounds great. And then he would go off, do the thing, and then, split open his leg or crack his head or something like that. Who knows what happened, right? But he would do something and he would get injured. But the fact of the matter is that it doesn't, sometimes we think, well, okay, yeah, but it only affects me. It's not a big deal. Oh, well, if I hurt myself. But the thing is that our actions actually can have ripples that carry on and go on not only through our communities, but certainly down through family lines. And our actions really affect people that are around us as well. What we choose to do and not do, what we choose to, the actions we choose to take, or all the different decisions we make, right? Even things like coming to church or taking Sabbath, whether or not we want to obey the 10 Commandments at all, right? And I want to say it like this because I don't want you to think that I'm up here saying, look, we have to obey every single aspect of the law. That's not what I'm getting at. But the point is that if we're going to say, if we're going to say that we have our faith in God, we're going to trust Him, that we're going to allow, we're going to put ourselves in a position where we're going to serve Him, then we need to make sure, we got to make sure that the decisions that we make, right, we really got to consider the consequences of the actions and how they're going to affect people. I mean, as a church, we do this a lot because we go, hey, we want to do this small thing because we know it could plant the seed that will allow something to grow and it will cause ripples that'll go out for generations. We use this kind of language all the time, especially when we talk about things like missions or witnessing and stuff like that. But this affects our home lives as well. how we treat our children and our spouses, how, right? And I'm being both, won't get into too many specifics there, but like all these little things, right? They have rippling effects that go on for generations, right? Things that, maybe my mother never thought too much about when, 20 years ago when I was young, things that I think about today, she probably didn't even think about it. Things might have been just a throwaway sentence. I think it's important when we read that Samuel didn't, it said that words didn't just fall out of Samuel's mouth. When we read the book of James and we read about how the things that we say, right, is like the rudder of a ship, how it causes big changes from such a small thing. We really need to consider this. We also need to recognize that we don't have to worry too much because God is going to keep his promise. If he said he's going to be faithful to his church, he will be faithful to his church. There's a lot to pick out. There's a lot to learn as we go through chapter 4 here today, but I really wanted to hone in on those two things, that God keeps his promises, and we need to consider our actions before we take them. Because it does have ramifications, it does have consequences, and it does affect the people around us. And as